And yet publicly, nothing. Silence. He gave interviews about films. About directing. About jazz. But family? Regret? The personal cost of the life he had chosen? He never went there. But something was shifting. As he moved into his late 80s and early 90s, people who knew him said he was different. Quieter in a new way. More still. Like a man who had finally stopped running from something and had turned around to face it. There had been real loss along the way. His relationship with his daughter Francesca had been strained for years. His long relationship with actress Sondra Locke had ended in a bitter, very public lawsuit in the late 1980s, a messy, painful split that pulled back the curtain on the man beneath the icon. Sondra later spoke openly about their years together, and what she revealed painted a very different picture from the one the world had been sold. Then, in 2019, Sondra Locke passed away. And something about that hit him differently. People close to him noticed the change. Like something had quietly cracked open inside a man who had spent his entire life making sure nothing cracked at all. No one could say exactly what it was. But you could feel it in the way he moved. In the way he spoke. In the way he seemed to be processing something privately, something heavy, something that had been waiting a long time to come out. No one could have predicted what he would do next. When he agreed to the live television interview, everyone assumed it would be business as usual. Promote the project. Answer a few safe questions. Give just enough of himself to satisfy the audience without giving anything real. That was the plan. But the interview started going somewhere else almost immediately. The host asked a question that nobody had approved. Something about regret. Something about looking back at a life as full and extraordinary as his. And wondering what he would have done differently. Clint Eastwood went quiet. But not the cool, deliberate quiet. The room went completely silent. Not the polite, rehearsed quiet of a television set waiting for a commercial break. This was a different kind of silence. The kind that creeps in when something unexpected is about to happen, and everyone in the room can feel it before a single word is spoken. Millions of people were watching from home. Cameras were rolling. And there he was, Clint Eastwood. Sitting under the studio lights, looking like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very, very long time. This was supposed to be a routine interview. But nothing about that night would be routine. Because the man sitting in that chair wasn't just a movie star. He was one of the last living legends of a golden era, a man whose name alone could silence a room. The man who had played the toughest, coldest, most unbreakable characters in the history of Hollywood. The man who never flinched. The man who never cracked. And yet, there he was. His jaw tight. His eyes carrying something that looked a lot like pain. And when he finally opened his mouth and started to speak, what came out wasn't what anyone expected. His voice cracked. People watching at home put their phones down. They stopped scrolling. They leaned forward in their seats, because they could feel it too. Something real was happening right in front of them. Something that no publicist had approved and no script had prepared. And before that night was over, the entire world would be talking about it. But to truly understand why this moment hit so deep, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to before the Oscars. Before the legends. Before the icon. Back to a boy who had absolutely nothing, and refused to stay that way. Clint Eastwood didn't grow up in the world that eventually made him famous. He was born in San Francisco in 1930. The heart of the Great Depression, into a family that had no money, no stability, and no guarantee of what tomorrow would bring. His family moved constantly, chasing whatever work they could find. There was no glamour in his childhood. No connections. No safety net. Just a quiet, lanky kid who learned early on that life was hard, and complaining about it wasn't going to change a thing. Before Hollywood ever gave him a second look, he was working as a lumberjack, a steel furnace stoker, a gas station attendant. These weren't stepping stones. These were survival jobs. And yet somewhere inside him, something was burning. When he finally made his way to Hollywood, the industry wasn't exactly waiting with open arms. Studios told him his Adam's apple was too big. His accent was wrong. His face didn't fit the mold they were looking for. For years he was nothing more than a background player, small roles, forgettable scenes, wondering if his shot would ever come. But what happened next changed everything. A TV western called Rawhide gave him his first real break. And then came Sergio Leone. The spaghetti westerns. A Fistful of Dollars. The good, the bad and the ugly. And suddenly, almost overnight, the world had a new kind of hero. Cold. Quiet. Dangerous in a way that felt completely effortless. He wasn't just acting. He was becoming something larger than himself. By the time Dirty Harry hit theaters in 1971, Clint Eastwood wasn't just a movie star, he was a cultural force. That squint. That silence. The way he could communicate more with a single look than most actors could in an entire scene. He didn't need words. He had presence. And decades passed. And the legend only grew. He moved behind the camera and proved he was just as powerful as a director. Unforgiven. $1 Million Baby. 2 Oscars. A career that redefined what it meant to age in Hollywood. He wasn't fading, he was deepening. And the world loved him for it. But here is the thing that almost no one was talking about. Behind all that success, behind all those iconic roles and Oscar nights and standing ovations, Clint Eastwood had a personal life that looked en. The host didn't move. The crew behind the cameras held completely still. Because everyone in that room understood, this wasn't an interview anymore. This was a confession. And no one wanted to interrupt it. But what made it even more powerful was this. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to fix his reputation or soften his image for a new generation. He was just telling the truth. The real, unpolished, unflattering truth. And for a man who had built an entire career on projecting invincibility, that truth was devastating to watch. Then the host gently brought up loss. And that's when everything shifted again. Clint began talking about the people he had loved and outlived. His voice changed as he spoke, the gravelly authority that had defined him for 60 years giving way to something softer. Something fragile. Something that the audience had never seen from him before. He talked about the giants he had grown up alongside. Paul Newman. Jack Lemmon. Walter Matthau. Gone. All of them gone. And he said something quietly that stopped everyone cold, that there is something profoundly strange about still being here when so many of the people who shaped your world have already left it. He said the things he was most proud of had nothing to do with the Oscars. Nothing to do with box office records or critical acclaim or the roles that had made him famous. The things he was most proud of were the moments he had chosen connection over isolation. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he admitted that those moments had been far too rare. The camera held on his face. And millions of people watching could see it clearly. This was a man sitting inside his own regret. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind that looks good on screen. The quiet, everyday kind. The kind that settles into a person slowly over decades, and never fully goes away. He talked about his mother. About conversations he had wanted to have with her but never did. About how grief doesn't follow a schedule, how even after all this time, it still finds him in unexpected moments. And by this point, the world outside the studio had already caught fire. Clips were spreading across social media before the interview was even over. Hashtags were trending. People who had never given Clint Eastwood a second thought were watching the moment on repeat, sharing it with their parents, their siblings, their friends, saying just watch this, just watch this. Because somewhere along the way, it had stopped being about him. It had become about every person who has ever been too proud, too stubborn, or too afraid to say the things that needed to be said, before it was too late. And he was saying all of them. Right there. On live television. With no safety net and nowhere to hide. Then the host asked the question that nobody was ready for. Was there anything he still wanted to say? To anyone? Clint paused. A long, heavy pause. Long enough that the producer in the booth was probably holding their breath. And then he said it. He wanted to tell his children he was sorry. Not sorry in the way people say it when they want to move past something. Sorry in the way that costs something. Sorry for the years he wasn't present. For letting success become an excuse. For choosing the work over the people who needed him most. He said that being a good father was harder than any role he had ever played. And it was the one role where he had truly fallen short. The words were simple. No music underneath them. No dramatic camera work. Just a tired, honest man, one of the most famous men in the world, speaking plainly about the things he could not go back and fix. And it hit harder than anything he had ever done on screen. Within hours, the clip had tens of millions of views. Media outlets around the world ran the story. Former co-stars and public figures shared their reactions. His daughter Francesca, who had spoken openly about their complicated relationship over the years, was. But the reaction that mattered most wasn't coming from Hollywood. It was coming from ordinary people. Comment sections filled with sons and daughters writing about their own distant fathers. Fathers writing about their own regrets. People talking about the conversations they had been putting off. The phone calls they kept telling themselves they would make someday. Because the truth that Clint Eastwood revealed that night, accidentally, vulnerably, completely unrehearsed, was this. The toughness the world had admired for 60 years had come at a cost. A deeply personal, deeply human cost. And now, at the end of a long and extraordinary life, he was finally being honest about it. After that night, something quietly changed. He didn't reinvent himself. He didn't go on a redemption tour or suddenly become someone different. That's not who Clint Eastwood is. It never will be. But people who know him say the mask came down a little. He was seen more with his family. Long overdue conversations happened. Dinners that hadn't taken place in years finally did. A man, in the final chapter of his life, choosing to show up in the ways he once didn't. The world will always remember Clint Eastwood for the squint. The silence. The iconic roles that defined an era. But perhaps his greatest performance was the one he never planned. The one where he sat under studio lights with no character to hide behind, no script to protect him, and no legend to fall back on. Just a man. Telling the truth. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And sometimes, real is the most powerful thing of all. So what do you think? Did Clint Eastwood's words hit you the way they hit millions of people around the world? Do you think it's ever too late to speak the truth, even after a lifetime of silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We genuinely want to hear from you. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you think about someone in your own life, share it with them today. Don't wait.